Super Saturday of round 8 in the A-League was setting up superbly. Macarthur nicked their first ever win in New Zealand in a hotly contested battle with the Phoenix. Sydney and Western United played out the game of the round, a free-flowing, defence-optional, 7-goal classic that has us placing some question marks around the Sky Blues. There was a 17-minute hat-trick from Sienna Silvesca in the dub, and then 4 goals in the first 45 minutes of Western Sydney-Brisbane, at which point I chose to tweet out these prophetic words. This is shaping up as such an elite day of A-League. Perth v Newcastle in the chaos time slot is literally the best possible fixture to finish off with as well. After that tweet, we were given one of the most anti-football halves of A-League we've ever seen, with Ruben Zadkovic's instructions for his players to go to ground, putting Gordon Bombay from that scene in the Mighty Ducks to shame. Then it was Newcastle delivering a beatdown on Perth Glory, the kind of fight where you're tempted to turn off because you feel like just the fact that you're witnessing this kind of hammering is somehow contributing to its brutality. Not quite the chaos we expected from the 10 p.m. time slot. So I, Lachlan, Avil, make an official apology to A-League fans all around the country. Whenever the first few games of a Super Saturday start to pop off, I vow to keep my mouth shut and allow the gloriousness of the A-League to take its natural course on this episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast. My name is Lachlan Avil, and tonight I'm joined by Christian Montegan. Christian, I'm sorry. Let's get it out there. I apologise. I should have just let things sit because it was shaping up as such a good day up until that point.
You're always going to jinx yourself, weren't you, mate? It was inevitable. As soon as I saw the tweet. No, but I agreed with you. I thought, yeah, okay, it's set up perfectly. And then, yeah, of course, we had those sequence of events happening, which we'll touch on shortly. But no, I think overall, there was obviously a lot happening, a couple of sort of misfortunate events that happened, such as, the Brisbane drama that, again, I'm sure we'll have a lot to discuss on there. So, yeah, I think overall it was entertaining, but some parts for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, we'll tackle it all for sure. Jacob Stevens, hello to you. How much of Super Saturday did you get through? Because 4 games, it is a lot to go back to back to back to back.
It is a lot. And I was also out doing some Christmas shopping as well. So it was, a bit spotty trying to keep up with the scores of everything. I missed most of the Wellington game, missed bunches of the rest. But in the evening, I got to witness that Perth Newcastle game in all its glory. And pun not intended, actually. I just realised that. But yeah, wow. What a round of football. Just, you talk about what A-League football is, and it's just, I think this sums it up pretty well because it was just insane from start to finish. Yeah,
spectacular. Well, last week we posed the question specifically of Adelaide United and Melbourne City, and we asked, are they real or are they not? And for me, guys, this weekend proved that, yes, they are. Adelaide perhaps slightly more convincingly than Melbourne City, but for me, they both did enough in their respective games to prove that they are the real deal and they can be competitive. Adelaide on Friday night, just so clinical. Jacob, obviously, you were paying special attention to this game. I thought Zach Clough, Archie Goodwin, Ethan Allegich in midfield, all really outstanding. You've got 2 fit centre backs, so when Isaias comes on the field, he can be in midfield, and he's playing like line splitting through balls. The combinations were really flowing. I think crucially, and Carl Viet talked about this after the game as well, in a lot of the games they've played so far this season, they've got ahead and they've had opportunities to really put teams away and put them down. And the fact that they hadn't managed to do that was probably a big source of a lot of our criticism towards them. And, I think they proved us wrong because we have been critical of them and saying maybe their points tally hadn't quite represented their performance levels. But I think they shut us up this week with an extremely convincing performance against Central Coast, 4-0. And they did put them away when those opportunities presented themselves.
Yeah, I think this was the sort of win that the side needed, not just to, prove all the doubters wrong, right, and say we are legit, but also I think to prove it to themselves, because it did feel like at times, and you mentioned that Viet said it as well, they just didn't put teams away when they should have. Adelaide have been characteristically this season a very fast starting side. That first 15-20 minutes of every game, you're expecting to see Adelaide dominate possession, have the ball in the attacking third most of the time, and creating a lot of chances. It was just the clinical touch at the end of it, or an incisive pass or something that was lacking. that wasn't the case against the Mariners, right? So I think it's also the players proving to themselves that, hang on, we are capable of doing this. We're capable of going away to Gosford, which is never an easy away day, against the Mariners, who are a team that have had our number in recent years, right? Like, we can go there and we can beat this team. And I think that's exactly what the side showed. It was a really tremendous performance. You mentioned Ethan Alagich, and it was quite interesting, actually, because before the game, I had my doubts about how effective the midfield was going to be, because Jay Barnett was missing through what it was said general soreness. So probably not a big injury, just, not feeling 100%. So he was left out of the squad. And I thought, that's going to be a huge loss, because, I mean, coming into the season with him, Carl Viet said after one of the home games this season, he said, it's like a new signing, because he's been injured for so long. To have him finally back in the side, it's such a big boost to everybody. And he's so good out of possession that it allows everybody a little bit more freedom when they're on the ball, to do what they want to do, rather than having to think about defensive structure. And I thought, without him in the side, it might actually limit what they're able to do. But Isaias came in and had one of those games where he just turns back the clock. He can do it every now and again. He did it against Perth away last season, was another really good example. I think he had 2 or 3 assists in that game, where it feels like the old Isaias, right? Just fantastic on the ball, can pick a pass out. I think he got sort of a pre-assist in this one with a beautiful ball in through to Zach Clough, which I thought was just timed absolutely perfectly. Fantastic pass. And that's the sort of thing that, that's what Isaias has always done in his career at Adelaide. The problem is that age has caught up to him. And so those sorts of things, they happen less often, and he's getting fewer minutes. So there's less chance for him to be able to do that. So it's important, I think, for him and the team that when he does get these minutes, that he is capable of doing that. And, I don't think that there was a single player that put a foot wrong all game long for Adelaide, to be honest. And that's something that over the last few seasons, one of the big killers has been individual mistakes, whether it's been from a defender, from a goalkeeper, or missing chances up front, or anything like that. It feels like it's been the individual mistakes that have made the fortune of this side. But in this game, everybody stepped up and performed fantastically. Delianov, he didn't have a lot to do, but he didn't make any mistakes, so that's a big tick, because he's been quite error prone recently. The defense, I thought, played really, really well. I mean, they're coming off the back of a resolute performance against the Jets with 10 men, where they defended quite well in the last 20-30 minutes, and they were able to carry that over. And the Mariners, they didn't have many chances, but I think that's testament to the fact that they defended so well. They didn't allow the Mariners to create those chances in the first place. They won the ball back well. They cleared it efficiently and effectively. They marked very well, which is one of the big gripes I've had with them this season, is the marking scheme was all over the place, but it really tightened up in this game, and they allowed fewer chances from wide areas. So, it does seem like things are starting to click for Adelaide. But that being said, I can't help but also be a little bit cautious about it, because it does still feel like this is a side where one big loss could cause sort of an implosion of sorts, where it's not they've done a good job in identifying some of the weaknesses, bringing in a few players with a bit more experience, which was something lacking last season. But there's still such a big reliance on these young players. You talk about Ethan Alagich in the midfield, Jay Barnett, Panakikianis at the back, Archie Goodwin and Luka Jovanovic up front. Austin Aoube is only 24 years old. Dylan Piraeus is only 20 something as well. They're not these veteran players. There's still a lot of youth and inexperience in this side, and I do think that it could just take one loss, one of those big losses, like it was to Sydney last season, and the season sort of capitulates from there. I don't know. Maybe Carl has worked some magic, and mentally this side is really, really resilient. And I hope that's the case, because I think
the difference is, the start of the season. So last season, Adelaide obviously went off that horrible start, and I think that
Adelaide beat Mariners and City back to back, and then had a draw against Victory away. They started.
I think that first month was pretty good.
Yeah. One of the best sides in the league.
Was it after the Sydney
game? Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I was going to say, because the first 7 games this season, I mean, okay, if they lose one bad game, okay, it might knock their confidence a bit, but surely as a squad, you're thinking, okay, yes, it has been an easier run, but these first 7 games, surely you've got to take that confidence aside from, just one poor game, because it can happen to any side. I think that'd show more of the mentality of this Adelaide side, because yes, we asked the question last week, are they the real deal if they come away with the win away from home against the Mariners, albeit not a very good Mariners side so far this season? I think maybe we have to still see against, I don't know, someone like a Sydney or a Victoria or an Auckland, the real test to come for Adelaide to see mentally, are they really up to task?
You know what I think though is the difference between like last year though is, 2022, 23, it was all about Craig Goodwin. And, Viet admitted that, I think it was at the start of last season, they were so reliant on Craig in terms of how they were moving forward and how they were scoring goals. And last year, it was all about Aaron Kunda. Maybe the team on the field wasn't totally reliant on him, but that's definitely where all the conversation was, right? But right now we're talking about Adelaide United as the team, and the combinations was the really pleasing thing to come out of Friday night. So I think that's, Jacob, what sets them apart this season compared to the seasons gone past is that, they obviously seem like a more well-rounded team. And yes, some of those players are still young, but at least there's a few more to spread the load.
Yeah, I was actually going to bring this point up when we both started talking at the same time. So great minds think alike, I guess. But yeah, it does seem more of a team effort this season for sure. One of the things last season was that it was Adelaide were Aaron Kunda's team, and that's all anybody was talking about when it came to Adelaide United. And obviously that puts the pressure then on a really young player, but it puts the pressure on the rest of the team as well, almost saying you're not good enough to get recognised. You don't deserve any of the praise or any of the recognition that's coming from the performances that you've had in these first 3-4 games. And that would have weighed on them quite heavily. And I think we did start to see a shift in the back end of last season where, yes, Aaron Kunda was still performing incredibly well because he's a very good player. But as a team, they stepped up and said, it can't all be about him. We've also got to step up and do our jobs and make things easier for him, help him out too. We can't be relying on him too much. And that was a nice change to see, because it's something that, this is why I have my doubts, is that since Cole Viet has come into the head coaching role at Adelaide, it does seem like the team has always struggled in big matches, whether it's a big home crowd or a really tough away day, or, in the semi-finals, right? I mean, Cole Viet's reached 3 semi-finals and fallen there every single time. It does feel like he really struggles to get the team ready and going for these big games. And so that's why I do think that maybe there is perhaps an element of mental fragility still there. But from what we have seen so far, the resilience to grind out results even when they're not playing well, like against Perth, they managed to get a 2-2 draw even though it was a really bad game from Adelaide. They're able to grind out wins again, with 10 men against the Jets. And then they go really comprehensive against the Mariners. Yeah, I mean, it is definitely good signs, and hopefully it is a sign as well that this side has turned a page and is starting to really build a confidence and a mental resilience to push on, because we know that Adelaide perpetual, top 6 lock almost, right? And it was kind of rare to see them outside of the finals last season. But one thing that they have really struggled with recently is taking that final step to get to that final match, and really put themselves in with a shout to win some silverware. And I think that if they can continue on the run that they've got, continue with this confidence and not let things get them down too much, then I mean, the sky's the limit for the side, honestly.
What about Melbourne City then, Christian? We'll talk about the crazy finish to the game a little bit later on, but on the balance of play, the draw probably felt like, the fair result. Aurelia Vidmar said as much after the game, which when you take that finish out of isolation, you think Melbourne City, a draw, fair result against Auckland, the team that's won every game so far. Obviously now that streak has ended. That's a win, and probably not quite in the same convincing way as we saw in Adelaide on Friday night, but I think this does prove their credentials as well, with now a massive derby coming up this weekend on Saturday night is going to be another tough test for them.
Yeah, I mean, so you think they're the real deal, Lockie?
I think they're almost, I'm not going to say a lock, but I'd give them like an 85% chance of playing finals.
Really? That high?
Yeah.
See, I still don't think City are the real deal in terms of, okay, like you say, 85% lock for finals. I'd probably give them maybe, I don't know, a 50-50, considering you got
Wow.
Wellington.
They either do or they don't.
No, it's a bit like last season. Like for now, obviously you've got Wellington, MacArthur on sort of the edges. You've got Western. I think they'll fall out. But you've got Adelaide as well. I think Adelaide are serious this season. I know Jacob's got his doubts, but we'll see later on. I just think, yes, they were incredibly close to grabbing all 3 points against the league leaders, but I think we would sound hypocritical if we just completely ignored their problems and what we've been saying about them since pre-season, and that was things like having an underwhelming transfer market, relying more on the older bodies. We've been questioning who's going to be the X factor to replace Tolga Arslan. Is Aurelio Vidmar the right man to lead this side into the future, into the rebuilding process? Like, I just don't think they've answered a lot of those questions so far. And I think it is still early for me to say, you know, that they're the real deal or they can, have a real shot of making finals. I mean, yes, they've made a decent start, but we've seen glimpses already in the derby, for example. I know they were still sort of assembling their squad, and you could probably give them that excuse, and they suffered a few of those injuries beforehand. But I just think they need to be tested a bit more before we can definitively say, okay, City, I like what we see from them. We've got a big enough sample size to judge them from. Like I just mentioned, the reliance on experience in the form of, you've got Andrew Nabu, Lecky, they've obviously been injured for a bit. You've got Aziz Beige as well. But there's still got players like Patrick Beach, who is a prime example in this match, conceding that second goal where there's going to be growing pains with, the careful injection of youth from Vidmar. And, like Memetu scored the opening goal, only 17 years of age. He still has to learn and develop his craft as well. So, again, I'm still not overly convinced that this is a top 6 caliber team. Do I think they might make it? Yes, of course, they've got an opportunity, but yeah, I'm just not convinced as of yet.
I look, I would say I would agree with you in terms of where they are as a team right now. However, I do think in terms of all the teams around them, they probably have the highest upside. You say, the likes of Matt Leckie, Andrew Nabu. Nabu's obviously gone for the season. Matt Leckie, Vidmar was saying, won't be good likely for the derby, but maybe New Year's Eve against the Mariners. He's going to come back. Max Caputo, obviously with the broken leg, I think it was, he's going to come back in the new year as well. Andreas Kuhn, for me, it is the closest player we're going to get to a Tolga Arslan replacement. No one's going to, match him 1-to-1, but he's been extremely crucial in a lot of the good things that City have been doing in the final third, which is really exciting. And I just think there's more to come. And so it had that question mark over them because the 4 wins they'd have were against the 4 bottom teams of the comp. Now they've gone toe-to-toe with Auckland. If they can back it up against victory, that's a really good sign as well. And I think with all those players still to come back and improve that side and make it even better, Jacob, given that they're already, 4th on the table, something like that at the moment, they're already in that position with more upside. That's why I'm seeing them as a bit of a lock for finals.
I think the problem is that it's quite tight in that mid-pack at the moment, and there's a few teams perhaps not performing as well as we think they should be, like, a Sydney, Wellington have had a couple of poor games now in a row. Western are starting an upwards trajectory, so they could be a threat later on in the season as well. I think there's just a lot of question marks outside of just the City environment that mean that it could be quite difficult for them to get the 6. I mean, it's great that they've had a good start to the season because they're going to need to rely on that probably in the back end of the season as these other teams are starting to come back up as well. But like you said, they will be boosted by having players coming in. But then does that also potentially upset what they've got going now, right? They're starting to find their feet and find some form and get into a groove. Does bringing a Matt Leckie back in, does that change the way that you look to play? Is that going to disrupt the rhythm that you found yourself in? It's a difficult one. We're not going to know until he's back. We're not going to know what impact he's going to have. But it does suggest that there's still more from them to come because that they do have so many players out injured and in key areas as well, right? It's not like they're missing depth pieces. They're missing proper starters in especially the attacking third, and yet they've still managed to score goals without them. So, I think it's a testament to the strength of the squad as a whole that even when you're playing players out of position, they're able to get results. Obviously, like you said, they've gone toe-to-toe with Auckland, which they're the only team so far to have done that, to have taken points of Auckland, only team to have scored first in a game against Auckland. It's a genuinely impressive performance, and there was part of me that was really hoping they'd get the result because not that I don't like Auckland, but I just thought it would have been really
sounds
really,
like it.
I just think it would have been really cool to see this City side turn things around in that way, right? Where they've been super stop-start this season, there's been a lot of question marks. I think if they could have gotten that result, it would have been a big statement. It's still a big statement anyway. But yeah, I don't know. I think the difficulty with me having as much confidence in them as you do, Lockie, is just how tight it is, in that sort of 4 to 8 region on the table, not just now, but as it will be moving forwards in the season, as teams get better or find their form again or whatnot. It could become a really tough battle.
I think you look at seasons past and you think Melbourne City, okay, you're sort of accustomed to them making finals and going in, deep runs towards, championship run. This season, I think that pressure aspect of it plays into their favor a bit. Whereas, you mentioned the point of Adelaide, if they have a bad result, will that sort of put them in a downward spiral? I think it'll be the opposite for City. I just see Vidmar as one of these coaches who can get the best out of his players despite a couple of hiccups along the way, which I'm sure they'll have when bigger tests come. I just think not having as much pressure compared to previous seasons. We mentioned the transfer market. I mean, a lot of us, let's be honest, didn't really expect much from this City side in terms of their ambitions going deep into finals, right? Maybe they might scrape into the top 6, but they were never really on your top list for to contend for the championship, right? So I guess embedding these youngsters, we know it's a rebuilding process, right? And I think I do take your point, Lockie, but I think next season is where I think you'll start to see a bit more growth and development, and that's perhaps when they might be able to, I don't know, perhaps push for a top 4, depending on the transfer market. They bring in a couple of key marquees, who knows? That's how I see it.
Last one on City, Patrick Beach's error to give away the goal right at the end. Obviously disappointing. Vidmar has been, throwing at this tune all season, really. That at the start of the campaign, they made a specific decision to go with him and give him a run in, because at some point they had to make a decision as to when you cut off Jamie Young and when you go for the next generation. And they said that they were going to do that. That was his response after Beach's error in the Melbourne Derby. This one here, a little more crucial because it, really did mean 2 points lost, which is unfortunate. He was asked the same question in the post-match. He was a little more vague in his response, actually. He said, might just have to sleep on it. The game's just finished in terms of who we would pick next week, because obviously the Derby, big atmosphere where Beach faltered last time as well. So that's going to be a really interesting question looking forward to the weekend as to who does start between the sticks for City. But if we move on from them, so we were talking about those kind of fringe spots and how the whole dynamic of that mid-table interact with each other. If we got Auckland in first, then Adelaide, Victory, City, who personally, I won't speak for you guys, but personally I think all those 4 teams will play finals, right? At this point. And then you kind of got the Bulls and Phoenix on the fringe in 5th and 6th, and then Sydney FC and Western just outside as well. And, on the Sky Blues and Western United specifically, it's quite remarkable compared to, where we thought they might be at the start of the season, that these 2 teams are now even on points at the moment. I still think Sydney will comfortably make their way in, which I know I'm kind of running out of spots for finals positions now. But if you kind of group those teams together, the question there is, after this game, Jacob, do Western United deserve to be in that conversation? Because I thought they were pretty good value, right? Yeah. They exploited a couple of weaknesses in Sydney that we've seen consistently now the whole season in terms of how exposed they are in transition, but a couple of really bright moments from some of their young players. Walty got his first of the season, second goal, I think, overall. Noah Botic as well, obviously. And they seemed, to have themselves pretty well worked out, and they dismantled this. Well, not dismantled, that's probably a bit extreme, but they beat this Sydney FC team. Good hard-earned 3 points.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that, talking about how tight things are there on those fringe spots, getting a win over somebody who's also competing for one of those spots is huge. It's, the sayings always are it's a big 6-pointer, but it really is, because this is a Sydney side as well that I don't think we've seen the best of yet. So the fact that you can get the result over them now is going to be huge for them. Gives them the confidence to go on and say, well, we've just beaten Sydney. Why can't we go on and beat those in spots above them, or at least hold them to respectable results? I thought it was a very smart game plan of knowing that Sydney are going to be vulnerable on the counter-attack, and so that's what they did. There wasn't as much patient build-up through the midfield as we've seen from Western. It was a lot of get the ball to your dynamic, quick players and let them try and break in behind. And it's something that Sydney has struggled with all season. It's something that teams that play with Sydney's sort of style are always going to struggle with inherently. And when especially the 2 that they're leaving back in defence, are typically quite young defenders, more error prone, less experience, easier to you'd assume easier to sort of exploit and be able to score from. So it was just smart from Western to go about things that way. To go, well, we're not going to necessarily play the style of football we want to when we've got an even playing field and when we can just play our game. It's not going to look like this, but when there is a specific weakness in a side, we're going to go for the jugular and we're going to try and really get the result from it. And I think that's smart management from Aloisi to be able to do that. It's really well done by the players to adjust to that change as well. I think it does play into the strengths of some of those players. Wallity, obviously, he looks just so good when he gets on the ball in space out wide, and the way that he's able to just drive at defenders, beat his man one-on-one, and create these chances. It's something we're seeing more and more of from Australian wingers. I think that's always been one of the big criticisms is there's not that sort of intent from young wingers to go and try and beat their man and create chances for themselves. But I think in recent years we've seen it a little bit more. Obviously, Aaron Kunda came through. That was his big thing. We're seeing it now with Wallity. Daniel Arzani, while he's not as young as these guys, obviously that's what he's always had up his sleeve as well. So it's good to see that sort of attacking intent now, rather than to just be the manager's player and just do what, let's play for the team sort of thing. It's no, I've got the chance to create something here, so I'm going to try and take it. And in this sort of a game where it's very transitional, that's huge, and you need players that back themselves in those situations. So I think the Western played extremely well. I think it's a massive statement. And like I said, if you're going to want to make it into finals, you need to be beating the teams that are around you, because you're not just getting the 3 points, you're taking the 3 points away from them. That's huge. It can't be understated how big that is for these sides. So yeah, Western look really good value for money. Obviously, sort of took a while for them to get into the season, but I think that they're starting to click now, and with a young side as well. They're sort of a bit like Adelaide have been in the last couple of years with that, or the Mariners, those sorts of teams, and we're sort of seeing these results starting to come now that we'd have expected of those teams in the past. So I think they're starting to find their feet, and I could definitely see them playing finals, and that's why it is so tricky to say for sure, oh yeah, City will be in, or Sydney will be in, or Western will be in, or whoever, because they all have their own merits to it, and they're all starting to find form at different parts of the season, and it's just going to make things so tricky. But yeah, getting a win over a direct rival is huge.
I think one of the most impressive parts of this game, Christian, for me, was that whenever they got into the final third, they were always decisive. That's a really key word for me. I think, number one, it's a marker of a good A-League side, and obviously I've seen a lot of Melbourne Victory over the years. But when I think about the good Melbourne Victory sides, it's they didn't muck around in the final third. They played the early cross, the early ball, and they went things about it with real intent. And part of that is obviously you need to do that to beat Sydney, because they're often exposed in transitional moments, as we've talked about. But it's just, as soon as you earn that advantage, as soon as one player is out of position, don't go backwards. Very Ange Postecoglou of me, but make the best of the advantages that you have in that specific moment, right? And I think someone who was actually a bit of an unsung hero in this game for that reason was Hiroshi Ibasuki. He was involved in all the first 3 goals. The first 2 specifically, he had these kind of flick-ons at weird angles that advance the ball forwards, right? And so often, I think in the A-League, if you don't receive the perfect pass, so many of the players, it's straight away in their head is to, okay, do the best you can to get the ball under control and then recycle it to retain possession, right? And then we'll find another way to go. Whereas they got higher up the field, and in both of those occasions, Ibasuki chose to play that risky kind of flick on, but it was in a really good area. And in this case, the risk paid off, and it allowed them to, take better advantage of the space that was on offer in the final third. And then, that third one as well, just having the strength to win an aerial duel against a goalkeeper, and then that creates another opportunity for your teammates. So I thought he was really impressive for not really getting a goal assist stat or anything on the board like that. So I just really love the way that they were able to go into final third and just really attack the Sydney FC goal.
Yeah, it just goes to show how pivotal experience is, right? Because last season, we could argue Western United were not as threatening as they have been the first few games of this season, but they were there. They were getting into dangerous areas. They were being bold. And this is a young team, right? Like, we're predicting them to have a bright future in 3 to 5 years' time. New stadium, good facilities. John Aloisi's there for the rebuilding stage of the club, which is fair enough. So we thought, okay, they're going to be bottom 2. But in this game in particular, like, they really took it to Sydney, and I was super impressed by them. Just how bold and brave they were, courageous going forward, the link up play, as you mentioned, Ibuzuki taking those risks like a flick on, but he knows when to play, as opposed to last season where Western United, it just faltered in that final third area and they just got punished down the other end, conceded goals for fun. I mean, this season, the defense, it has its problems still, but when you're so decisive, like you said, Lockie, and clinical in front of goal, finishing those opportunities away from home against a top quality side, like for Sydney FC, like that's surely a massive confidence boost for Aloisi and the rest of the team moving forward. And I think this definitely demonstrates that on their day they can beat anyone. But going back to your question that you asked, Jacob, are they sort of the real deal in terms of can they push for a final spot? I think, again, too early to say, but it depends on who they play, right? Because they played Sydney on the weekend, a Sydney side who defensively were just too open at times. I think the structure and the shape went missing. And, a couple of weeks ago, Western played Victory at Amy Park, and Victory were much more solid defensively. It was very difficult for Western to break them down. So I guess it just depends on the opposition, right? Because looking at it on paper, I don't see Western United, for the talent they've got up front, being able to really cause a lot of problems to a Phoenix or an Auckland, who we know are extremely disciplined at the back, right? I believe Western got a point against Wellington, so I'm being a bit of a hypocrite there. But at the same time, we still know, right, how defensively well-sounded they are, and the structure, it's very good, right? So yes, there are positive signs there for Aloisi to build on. Top six, I still don't see it. I just see too many teams ahead of them. I think the level playing field will equal itself out as we progress, through to the season. I don't think it's their time this season. I think, like I said, with the future and the youth they're investing in, they're building, I think they've definitely got something really special happening in the next 2 to 3 years. But for now, I think if Aloisi can get the foundations right, which so far looks like he has, right, he's really, I guess, found that balance probably earlier than he expected. So if he can keep on this trajectory, I think if they can knock on the door for finals and just miss out, I think for them, definitely that would be a successful season.
Just on some of the other side of the coin of a few of these games, Sydney FC, of course, most of their losses have really come about the same way, and we've been talking about this on ends, but we love what they're doing in build-up, but this exposure when, teams are running at them, this is more than just a quirk of this, relation system they're playing now. This is a significant deficiency that teams are taking advantage of, so they have to be really careful of that. Obviously, the Mariners, they were kind of on this run of 2 wins. This was kind of like the Mariners rebound in quotation marks that we saw last year. That's put to a pretty convincing stop now. So it's going to have to go back to the drawing board. They're no longer the Mariners that can just bounce back from these kind of hits. So that's going to be an interesting watch. And then Auckland as well, Jacob. Obviously, dropping the first points of the season is a massive story. An extremely strange game. We can touch on a couple of the oddities now. The molehill in front of Alex Paulson. Bimby said that Alex had actually been sick all week. He'd only trained once, so maybe a slight lapse in concentration. You're not taking the precautions that you probably should have. Add that in with the fact that the ball took a very annoying bounce, skid off the surface right before him is unfortunate. But, then they go and, Patrick Beach has this error. Maybe it evens out. They also have the offside where Jake Brimmer's like off the pitch. You're the rules expert. I'm assuming you can still be offside if you're off the pitch. I guess that's how it works. But if Auckland hadn't had that true A-League experience that Chiefy was talking about, you go away, deal with the travel and everything, then I think this game was a very good introduction to that.
That's right. It's a proper welcome to the league for them. That Paulson one, I keep playing it over in my mind, and part of me feels that some of the blame as well should be on Pinecker. For the way in which he played that pass. It was under essentially no pressure whatsoever and absolutely fizzed it back into Paulson, which it's funny because about 3 or 4 minutes later, he played the exact same pass, but not as heavily. And guess what? It didn't bobble over Paulson's foot into the back of the net. So I do think that part of it was the pace of the delivery itself actually sort of, amplified perhaps the extent to which it bounced. And you could see on the replay from the reverse angle, Paulson gets his foot out and you're like, easiest touch of all time. And then it just like just hops over his foot and rolls into the back of the net. There's not much you can do about
He
that.
didn't
as a
adjust his
keeper.
body properly, though. I think he didn't
No,
get
he
his
agree.
was.
body
Yeah,
behind
yeah,
it. He was just a bit sort of.
yeah.
He wasn't. Not he concentrated, but in terms of his body positioning, you can
He was
tell
too
just sort of a
relaxed.
bit off balance, too
Yeah,
relaxed. That's the word. And
yeah.
you couldn't see it coming, because who would have predicted that, right? For the ball to go behind it, but yeah, that was probably part of the reason why it
Yeah.
happened.
Yeah, so it was sort of a combination of things there. But then, I mean, to be able to go back, and credit to Auckland, they were able to keep fighting, even with an offside goal. And at first, nobody was really sure either why was this given offside, right? Like, because the ball's come back out. So I think was it De Vries on that left hand side, and he whips the ball back in.
Brimmer,
It's put it, or Brimmer rather, yeah. And it's put in the back of the net, no problem. Everyone's happy with it. And then there's just like, they've given an offside, and all the replays were showing that second ball in, and not the ball coming back out. And so everyone was a bit confused, like, why have they been given offside here? And then obviously, the producers piped in and let the commentary team know, no, it was Jake Brimmer off the first one. It was headed back to him, and he was offside. But yeah, they kept fighting, and it did almost feel inevitable that they were going to get that goal to equalize it. Okay, yes, it came in rather unfortunate circumstances for Patrick Beach, which we've touched on, but it did feel like a goal was coming with the pressure that they were putting on in those final few minutes. So look, I think that all things considered, Auckland will be probably pretty happy to walk away with a point after going down a goal very late on. It just seemed like things were going against them. Obviously, it's their first proper away trip. To grab a point, you can't be too angry at it. But then on the flip side, you go, well, if the pitch is flat, if the defender heads it rather than our attacker, and then Brimmer's not offside, all these little if, buts, or maybes, and you go, and then we would have had the 3 points, and we'd have been perfect through 7 games. Like, yeah, it's those fine margins in the league, and Auckland for the first time perhaps on the sort of receiving end of that. But that's the sort of thing that I was saying back to their result over Sydney was, these things come around, right? Like, yes, okay, perhaps a bit fortunate with the way things happened in that game, and then they're sort of copping a little bit here, because that's just the way football works. It always comes back around for it.
Yeah. I think, obviously Auckland had some personnel issues in this game. Louis Vestrata, who has been one of the best players in the league, I believe, I can't remember what the injury was, but I think that was just a 1 to 2 weeks. So that's a short-term thing. We know Dan Hall is going to be out for 2 to 3 months with, I think, a broken bone in his ankle.
Yep.
So that's a really big blow for them. He's obviously, with the Mariners, what he's done the last couple of years, extraordinary defender. So that happened really late on in the week as well. So they had to come into the game with a lot of changes that they wouldn't have, loved. So maybe that slightly decreases the argument for City as well. But they had to navigate all that, still learning to travel as well. You think a lot of these, the Australian-based players that might have, been based in Australia, having to now do the travel to New Zealand every week. I'm sure the international players, you're thinking, what are we signed up for? Have to do this flight every second week. On average, I guess they haven't had to do it yet, but that's all part of the learning process, and they'll learn from that, I'm sure. Let's move on to the conversation that we knew we had to have when we were watching this game. Brisbane Roar, obviously Western Sydney Wanderers 2-0. The Roar have really been struggling for points, but some absolutely disgraceful time-wasting tactics from Brisbane's perspective. It was so bad that the cameras were actually on lookout for it, and got a grab of Ruben Zadkovic, telling Lachlan Freak. He was doing when the baseball, you got the base coaches, they're doing all the taps on the head and the nose, like giving secret signals. And then eventually, taps his nose for the indicator, and then he's grabbing his hamstring, and then Lachlan Freak goes down on the field.
I think the hamstring wasn't secretive, was it?
No, it wasn't. It was the nose and the hamstring. This is the real one. This is the real message, right? And, what are we trying to do here, really? Like, I understand that Christian, he's trying to hold on to a point because he wants to instill a little bit of confidence in his team just by earning a result. But, in a league that doesn't have relegation, is that really what we're trying to do here? And, I mentioned the scene in the Mighty Ducks where Gordon's, he's had a few games and the team's not going too well. So he's resorting to go to training and convincing his kids how to fall down on the ice to get penalties. It's like, is this really where we are? Where your main focus at this point in the game is not how the football you're playing; it's to try and waste some clock just so you can get a point.
If I was a Brisbane fan watching this second half, I'd be absolutely appalled because, as you mentioned, like seriously, you don't have relegation. If you're doing this against a side with the defense, as the Wanderers do, have been susceptible, they've been easy to get at. They've leaked goals for fun this season, right? And Brisbane put two past them in the first half. They look good with Waddingham. Good link up play. Progressing the ball forward. They had some good passages, right? And we've seen that through Spurs this season. That's why you, Lockie, you've had, you're really big on Brisbane, although albeit not the best of starts. I think you slowly, hopping off that train now.
Yeah.
But it just goes to where is Zakovic's ambition, moving forward? Like, why wouldn't you just try and push for 3 points? It's not like you're playing an Auckland or one of these big clubs, Sydney Victory. It's like, I think Vince Rigari put out a good tweet on the week, and I added into my sliding doors segment for our reviews of the games. And he said something on the lines of, 10 years ago, Brisbane Roar were the best product, the best entertainment, the best, this is the club where, it stands for something, right? They had Ange Postecoglou, entertaining football. And I'm thinking, Zakovic has brought some entertaining stuff this season going forward, but to see those scenes at the end with the time wasting, and it just dilutes the spectacle, right? I mean, the first half I thought was pretty good, from both teams, to be fair. And to see that in the second half, to hold on for a point, you get a point, okay, what does that achieve? Is that going to save his job? I just don't understand where.
That's the thing, right?
Where does that get him?
It's this case of if a manager that does it and they get really good results, you think of a Mourinho and Ancelotti, Sergio Conceição at Porto, right? It's dark arts, it's genius, it's really clever. But you're a Brisbane side that's second bottom and you've just got a point. It does seem.
If it's a cup final, okay, fair enough. You've got something to cling on. You've got something to play for. You've got extra time. You've got something. If you're top of the table, okay, fine. I can understand it to an extent. But even then, to sort of, rub your hamstring to say, okay, go down, and all the time wasting that happened during the game. Just, this is a league which is dying for eyeballs, dying for, attendance figures to go up. We've seen the past couple of weeks, it hasn't been the best viewing, if we're being completely honest. And to see scenes like that, I mean, where does that put the league in? What position does that put it in terms of the product and the spectacle? It's just not a good look.
Well, let's go to some of the positive then. Of course, Thomas Waddingham, what a goal that was. For me, look, he's shown, and I was watching this goal and watching him have the confidence to take that shot on that angle, and then the quality, of course, to put it away as well. And I'm thinking, what other Australian striker is going to hit that, more often than not? And you go through the names that have been featuring in the Socceroos recently, and I don't have a lot of confidence that any of them can do that. And, it wasn't quite right in the corner. Maybe Lawrence Thomas, who was a little bit blinded by a defender, whatever, right? But for me, he has to be in Tony Popovic's plans to at least integrate him into the national team senior setup in the next 12 months. I'm not suggesting that you throw him in straight away, against Japan in Perth, which we'll get to later on, and he would be the saviour that takes Australia to the World Cup. But he is 19 years old. He is 5 behind Nesta in terms of the most goals in the A-League of all time as a teenager. He has until April. He'll probably get it, if not very close. This is an extreme talent we have on our hands here. So he was exceptional for me. I'm really positive on him. Lucas Harrington came in central defence for his first A-League start. For me, showed a really good head on his shoulders. He seemed to pick the right moments, when to go in, when to back off. Really smart. Sadkovic was saying over the last month or so, he's only been training once or twice a week because he's been doing his HSC exams. So he's been a little bit preoccupied, but Ruben spoke in pre-season about, the potential ceiling for him. So expect to see a lot of him moving forward. Really excited about that prospect as well. The other maybe talking point out of the game, Jacob, Lachlan freak, the knuckleball. Brandon Borello scored 2 goals, did very well. But I think we talked about Will in the group chat, right? Because he's the goalkeeper. We wanted his opinion before we had to go at freak. He's got to be doing better than that.
100%. That was, not good enough. And Will certainly didn't hold back in the group chat.
No.
And I, to be fair, I think a lot of it was pretty on point. I mean, it just was not good enough for a starting goalkeeper. I mean, you could say the same about like Patrick Beach's thing, right? In his game, letting it go through their hands like that. Like, yeah, these are goalkeepers that if they want this spot, they have to be doing better than that. And it's as simple as that. Okay, yes, well hit by Borello. Yes, it's a knuckleball that makes things slightly more difficult because you can't be 100% confident where it's going to go, what it's going to do, how fast it's going to be coming at
And it
you.
was
If it's
unexpected as well, right? I mean, I don't think he would have
Yeah.
expected that a knuckleball. He's thinking, oh well, like I expected, maybe a curling free kick or with power. It might have just come as a shock to him. I don't know.
But it's also one of those ones where you do also have to do a bit better, or at least make it look like it wasn't as easy as it was. But that's football, and that's goalkeepers. And I've said before on the podcast that mistakes that goalkeepers make are highlighted because they usually result in goals. So that I think that's another instance here. But you're right there about the two Brisbane youngsters, Waddingham and the Socceroos. Hopefully they've learned from the Irankunda situation in how to handle a young, exciting player and integrate them into the squad, because there's very similar sort of vibes about it in terms of his breakout season. He's scoring a lot of goals. He's doing a lot. He could be a really key piece for the side moving forwards. Let's just hope that they don't, whatever the complete mess was with both the Socceroos and then one of the underage sides as well, wasn't there? With issues with Irankunda. Let's hope there's none of that with Waddingham, and that it's all cleared up and they've learnt from that saga previously. And then spot on with Harrington. He joins. There's been a couple of young defenders that I've been really impressed with this season. He obviously getting his first start, but Dylan Leonard for Western United.
I just want to say as well, I forgot to mention this when we were doing the Western game, but that dribble that he had out of the box and to La Croqueta, three players just to take themselves out of pressure, that was insane.
It's awesome to see from these young defenders to have the confidence to be able to do that. And where Harrington has a really good footballing IQ out of possession, you mentioned there, he always knew what to do in any given moment, whether it was to engage the ball carrier, to drop off a little bit and cover space. He was making the right call every time. But with Dylan Leonard, it's like every time he's on the ball, he's making the right call. Yes, okay, sometimes it looks a bit risky, and he's got
apart from that goal he gave away, but yes.
Well, that's the thing, right? It is a little bit risky the way that he plays, but it's refreshing to see that from a young defender, to sort of throw caution to the wind a little bit and say, well, look, goalkeepers are getting on the ball more often now. Well, why can't I try a little bit of something and show what I've got as well? And he's obviously been actually an increasing attacking threat for Western. Was it he scored at Unite round a goal? He's just such a quality player. And Lucas Harrington, another one who it's really good to see, because I think that's sort of somewhere there's been perhaps a bit of a dearth in quality in terms of Australian players. Yes, there's been fantastic midfielders, fantastic wingers through the years, but the two big spots have always been striker and central defence, where it's sort of been a bit of a mixed bag in terms of who's been able to be fielded in those sides. So to see these young players really starting to make a name for themselves and so well at such young ages as well, and with such little inexperience, it's fantastic. And Brisbane, perhaps their biggest issue so far this season has been their defense, right? So if Harrington can start to get more minutes and start to build more confidence, and they can build around him, then maybe Lockie, you were right to be a little bit a little bit optimistic about them. I still think that their start to the season has been bad enough to almost rule them out of finals. But like I said, if Harrington can keep getting involved, if they can build around that, Waddingham keeps up his goal scoring record. Brizete is another one who's looked very, very good for the Raw. They have these pieces there. Can they build around them? Western have managed to do it. So it is a big question mark. Obviously, Zadkovic is going to have to do a lot of work there. And rightful criticism about the antics there with the time wasting and things. But he has a squad on his hands that he could do something with. So it's about seeing him put that aside now and being able to use these young players in ways that is going to be effective for them, because there's promising signs there. And I was said last week, I'm sort of halfway through putting the line through the Raw, It's like it's still sort of halfway there. My pen's still on the page, but I do think that they've got the pieces there to make something of their season.
Yeah, you got Quinn McNichol coming off the bench as well, another young Queenslander who's making an impression. So, yeah, I mean, they clearly went down this route of young Queenslanders they wanted to promote, and the signs for the future are at least looking pretty good. It has been a strange week for goalkeepers as well. Like, the Macklin Freak era, we've obviously talked about Beach and Paulson in the City Auckland game. Matt Sutton also in the Western game, who despite conceding 3 goals was one of the standout performers. I think it had 10 saves. It was really, really good for them and kept them in the match. So, strange week for them. Christian, I want to ask you, do we think that Rob Stanton might have brought out the boxing gloves a little bit prematurely for the Jets? I'm not sure if the trip to Perth was the one you really want to, double down on, because they tore Glory to shreds, right? And now they have a bye and have to travel away to Wellington, who, in Cataliano has not been happy with their performance. So I'm sure they're going to be revved up as well. I'm not sure the Glory game is the specific week where the Jets needed that boost.
I see your point, but I tend to disagree. It's easy to say in hindsight because of how easily they dispatched them, right? But
that's what I'm worried about, right? Like if it's so easy, then they might sink back into the same things.
No, completely agree with what you're saying. But to see where the Jets were a couple of weeks ago at that Mariners gaming night round and Stanton's comments afterwards, there was a sense of, okay, perhaps he's slightly losing the dressing room in terms of their performances in the fight on the field. And maybe he just needed to give his squad a kick up the backside, and that's resulted in this 4-0 win. Had he have not maybe done whatever he did in the training park this week, or last week, then perhaps they wouldn't have beat Perth. Like, you just don't know. You just don't know what's happened behind the scenes to warrant such a convincing win. Yes, Perth, they're absolutely atrocious. How bad can you get? How bad can you get? They were terrible, honestly. The shape, the structure, just their organisation, everything. I know you go on about rebuilding. Drilic, I was in the press conference when they lost to the Victory last week, and Drilic was going on. It's a massive rebuilding process, yes, but at the same time, you've got to instill some principles, defensive discipline, something just to keep it respectable. It was just none of it. It was just so easy for the Jets just to split them open in the first half. Yeah, you just felt sorry for those Perth supporters watching in the stands, because it's like, you've paid this money to watch this. Like, it's no, really, it's not a good look. And for the Jets, yes, I guess it's the bye you mentioned, right? They've got this week. So, yeah, I guess there is this possibility or a cast of doubt that perhaps they can fall back into their old ways. You're about to say something.
Yeah, I think they had a bye after the MacArthur game that they won as well, actually. I think it's happened twice now. They've been hit with that momentum again.
Yeah, true. Might be right. And who have they got, after the bye? I'm just trying to
Wellington away.
Wellington away. Yeah.
It's a tough one.
Yeah.
And then they've got Sydney afterwards, so the wheels might fall off again.
That's a tough run.
But they needed this win, albeit a Perth side who are absolutely struggling. I mean, you need to start from somewhere, right? And if they can get some sort of confidence, I mean, we saw that win against MacArthur. I think it was in round 2, right, from the Jets, and you thought, okay, there's glimpses here. I mean, they're showing something, right? And if they can just keep, I don't know, just the consistency intact somewhat, just to prove that they're on the right path. And I think, not to say that they can make something of this season, because I do think, like, best case, probably bottom 4 for them. I don't see much else for this Jets side considering the teams above them. But yeah, in terms of this game against Perth, you can only beat who's in front of you, right?
Yeah. And for Perth, I mean, we've had this conversation so many times already. At least until the transfer window opens, I give them no hope of winning a game of football at all. There's been plenty of murmurs of some players that could leave. Already, even some players that have just been brought in the latest window could be heading straight back out the door, and hopefully some incomings. You would hope. Obviously, they're very, very well funded. David Drilic has been asked relentlessly this question, but apparently all the conversation with the ownership is that Pelligra is understanding of the situation and is willing and able to fund the team long term back into success. So we'll see if that starts in the next window. But it really has to if they really to get anything out of this season. But yes, and then finally Wellington as well. I think this game for them against MacArthur, they don't lose 2 games in a row, right? I don't think that happened once last season, Jacob. So that's already an oddity. Italiano was calling for a bit of a reset. He said maybe some of the players that were there last season experiencing maybe a little bit of a hangover in terms of what their expectations could be, and the fact that even when they were down in games, they always had this belief that they could come back, whereas this year that same kind of instilled an intrinsic motivation maybe isn't there, and it was perhaps a little bit unrealistic to expect that just to carry over. So by the sounds of it, the way he was talking post-game, a little bit of a reset is coming for them, and they have to determine, what kind of beliefs and values they hold as a club moving forward. But I think definitely the shining light, Marco Rojas, he set a new record for days between appearances for the same club in the A-League men. 5,048 days since February 2011, I think it was.
Crazy.
So that was incredible. And then obviously his link up between him and Barbarouses was a really good, impressive moment. So hopefully as Rojas builds fitness and gets closer and closer, maybe not playing 90 minutes all the time, but 70, 80 minutes, we'll get to see more of that link up.
Yeah, I think you're right that's a positive to take, but also the positive is that Barbarouses still has his scoring boots on. 2 goals in 2 games. It was a big question mark heading into last season is, are they going to be able to get the Costa from the victory days that was always an attacking threat and was scoring a bunch of goals, or is he going to have fallen off, and he was able to put things together and be a real threat? And then the question coming into this season was, is age going to get to him? Is he going to be able to keep it up? And at least it looks like he is. So, I mean, for the Phoenix, it's about just tidying things up. I think, they've not quite clicked fully. This idea of players perhaps expecting it to be like it was last season, perhaps a bit naive of a comment to make from Italiano, because I think that actually reflects quite poorly on his management then, in a way, in that one of the things that you've got to do with your squad at the start of a season is set expectations, and work out what your sort of, I suppose, KPIs are going to be, what to expect from the season, how you want them to play, etc., etc. And if they've come out, sort of complacent, expecting things to be easy again, then perhaps he's not been, quite honest enough with them, realistic enough with them, and set the standards that need to be set to get these results. They're still scoring, so it's not all completely gone. It's not like they're getting shut out and losing 4-0 like Perth, but they're not the Phoenix of last season. Something's not quite clicking. Okay, they've had a few players leave. They've also brought a couple players in, obviously Rojas being one of them, and I think he's going to be a big part of the side moving forwards this season for them if he can keep up that connection with Barbarouses, yes, but also individually if he can perform at a good level, then that's going to be a huge boost for them. Just something's not quite right in terms of, I don't think it's a fatal thing for their season. I just think that it's something they're going to want to figure out sooner rather than later, because they're sort of stumbling their way through matches at the moment, whereas you think back to last season where even if it was a tight game, it still felt like it was executed well from the Phoenix, like they played to their game plan and they knew what they were going to do. And obviously Chiefy's always talking about how control looks differently for different sides, and that was one of the things last season they did really well, was control games. They weren't dominating, but this season, it feels like if they're not in control of a game, it does feel like it can sort of get away from them a little bit, and they're having difficulty clawing that back. So they've got to figure a few things out, but I don't think it's completely fatal for them. It's just a bit disappointing perhaps, because maybe we'll build up this New Zealand rivalry heading into with the run that Auckland have had to start off right at the top of the table, and Wellington being good last season. They're going to both be top of the table 1-2, and then it's going to be the third place team that gets into Asia this year, and all of that. But no, it does look like Wellington have hit some strife and some struggle. But I think with Chiefy at the helm, with the squad that they do have, it's not a massive worry right now. But like I said, they're going to want to sort it out, because they can ill afford to, and we've mentioned it like 4 or 5 times now in this podcast episode, it's a tight mid grouping of teams. If you're dropping points, it's going to start to get away from you a little bit. So tidy things up and they'll be all right. But if they can't figure out these little kinks, then it's going to be difficult for them.
I think the another bit of key context there as well is that last season, the so-called bigger clubs were all faltering as well. Sydney FC weren't where they cracked up to be. Melbourne Victory had a massive run where they just couldn't score goals and kept drawing games. The Wanderers and City were on the edge of finals as well. So that opened up the opportunity for, of course, the Mariners, but also Wellington to really establish themselves in those top positions. That is not the case this year. Obviously, Western Sydney's still down the bottom, but those other three have really made an improvement. So it's going to be tougher for those, quote unquote, smaller teams again this year. Finally for tonight, Christian, we'll go to the Socceroos. We learnt on Monday that the final home game of Australia's World Cup qualifying campaign against Japan will be played at Perth Stadium. So Optus is obviously the franchise name, big 60,000-seater Oval Stadium, controversially, of course. And for me, Christian, it feels like a scalp to take this game away from Sydney. Traditionally, all the really big games, when we think about John Aloisi, we think of Sydney, right? That's just where these games take place, but it won't be the case. This could be the game that confirms Australia's qualification to the World Cup potentially, and that big moment could be happening in Perth.
Yeah, quite a surprise that they got this game in Sydney because, like you mentioned, not even just the Aloisi moments, just these big qualifying games, usually against Japan as well. They've regularly been in Sydney. I can't remember anywhere else where they've been, in different locations like Melbourne or Brisbane. And then to Brisbane's point, so not even one game at Suncorp in this qualifying.
No, yes, they obviously had the Gold Coast game, but
that's that's shocking for not to have one game. That's pretty staggering. So you're right. It's a big coup for Perth and the city to get this high caliber game. I thought they might have had a chance maybe for the Indonesia game, they would have given it to them. But for Sydney, that's a really big move. And perhaps you've mentioned it here in your notes, Lockie, for the Asian Cup 26. Is that sort of a move for them to say, okay, we're capable of hosting these big events and big finals?
Yeah, the final potentially. Yeah.
The only sort of question I have with it is the ovals and the atmosphere. Will you get the best out of it in terms of, trying to make it a hostile atmosphere for the Japanese players? Because that's why I quite like it in Sydney, because you get, really close, compact, you get the atmosphere, you get those good vibes, and Australia they usually play well up in Sydney. They always get good results there. So perhaps could be a slight risk. Hopefully Japan are already qualified and there's that aspect where they can hopefully rest a couple of players.
Yeah.
I know that's a bit down the line. So but no, for Perth, it's brilliant for their fans. Obviously it would be a slightly different time zone for us. It'll be about 2-3 hours in front. So it might be a 10 o'clock kickoff for us.
Behind, So it'll
for
be
us from Melbourne.
Yeah, it might be like a 9:40. Oh, actually, usually for AFC, they'll be about 8 o'clock. So, you're right. Probably 10 p.m. Or is it still daylight savings by that point? Because that would be 11 p.m.
I've just lost track with daylight savings, to be honest.
This is in the June-July period, is it?
True. So, it'll be back to standard time. So, 2 hours,
Yeah. Nonetheless, though, I mean, that's beside the point. I think Perth do deserve to showcase, their worth, and hopefully for them, like I said, perhaps maybe even a chance to host the final for the Asian Cup.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Obviously, there's so many factors at play. Japan obviously beat Australia the last game. I know over the course of time the record's been good, but the last visit to Australia they won in Sydney. So maybe you want to switch it up. Yeah. Obviously, there's how do Football Australia negotiate with the tourism boards? It's not like they just give these games out to different places. It's a negotiation. I do wonder, I've had this thought in the back of my head the whole time. A destination New South Wales maybe just a little bit gun shy over football at the moment, given what happened with the grand final deal turning into Unite Round and, the success or failure, whichever way you want to look at it, of that event. Depending on the bidding process, I would love to know the intricacies of that, how that played out. Of course, we never will know, but good for Perth. Do they fill a 60,000-seater stadium? I'm not sure. Maybe it's a long way away, but as the beauty of the grand final deal, people know it's going to be there. They have time to plan and travel, right? The same can be said. I say that tongue in cheek, of course. But, as you say, it's June, July. So people have 5-6 months. They know the game is going to be there. Do you want to make plans ahead of time and get some cheap flights and hotels while they're available to go over to Perth and potentially watch the Socceroos qualify for a World Cup? That option is there. But fascinating itself. But I think, guys, we'll leave it there for this episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast. Christian Montegan, we really appreciate your time today on what has been, it must be said, a stinking hot day in Melbourne. I've had to turn the fan off for the recording, so it sounds okay, but I'm starting to sweat up, so we better get off.
I forgot to say at the start of the podcast, apologies if you see sweat running down from my face because it's that hot. It's like I mentioned before, it's like 38 degrees. It's probably gone a bit cooler now, but yeah, it's stinking hot today.
Jacob Stevens as well, thank you. How's the weather been over there in Adelaide? You guys usually get it a few days before we do.
Yeah, it's been hot here as well. 41 degrees on Sunday. It was 38 degrees today. There's a cool change coming through tonight though, which is nice, but then it's back up into the mid-30s at the end of the week. So, we get one day of reprieve and it's back to usual, but that's summer for you in Australia.
Weatherman Jacob.
Well, hopefully some of the weather gets up to bloody Queensland so we can play some cricket, because I'm sitting here at my desk all day and they're going on and off the covers. There was like 7 or 8, times the covers would come up and off, and it was just ridiculous. Anyway, we'll leave it there. Thank you all very much for watching and listening as always. All the subscriptions, the likes, the comments, we appreciate it all. We've been having some really nice discussions with people as well recently. So please do reach out. We'd love to talk football with you. But that will do for today. We'll be back on Friday. And of course, the December period gets very busy for everyone. So if we don't see you until the new year, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. We hope you have a good time with your family and sundry. But that'll do. We'll see you later. Goodbye.